Thailand's Prime Minister has ordered an investigation after a political activist died in pre-trial detention. 28-year-old Netiporn Sanesangkhom was jailed in January under Thailand's strict lèse, majesté laws, which bans defamation of the royal family. Criticism of the law has intensified in recent years. In last year's elections, the winning Move Forward party stood on a platform of amending the law, but were ultimately prevented from forming a government. And that government would have been led by Pita Limjaroenrat, who joins me now in the studio. Welcome, Mr. Limjaroenrat.
Thank you for having me.
What is your first comments on the death of Netiporn Sanesangkhom? Who do you hold responsible for her death?
It's a tragic loss of Thailand as a nation, where a group of young activists was asking for rule of law instead of rule by law. So detention before trial happens in Thailand. That's what she wanted to fight against. Also, the right to bail, presumption of innocence. These are the three core things that she was fighting for. Of course, the reform of the lèse majesté law was the key point at the very beginning, but because she was refused right to bail. So that's why a lot of younger generations detained before trial, went on hunger strike. And she's not the only one. I just feel the pain inside for her family that she had to go through it this way. There should be ways of negotiating or the kind of dialogue that doesn't have to cost lives.
But should she have even been in prison? Because what was she doing at the end of the day? She was allegedly asking people's opinion about the royal family, and that is what landed her in prison. Should she have even been in prison?
In Thailand, the law says that a mild criticism of the monarchy is not allowed, but the sentiment of the era might change to a certain extent, and we as a lawmaker wanted to do an attempted amendment of the law so that there's proportionality between protection the head of state and the freedom of speech. So making sure that the law is at the right proportion when it comes to freedom infringement. So even if it's wrong, she has the right to bail. It's presumption of innocence. She has to go through the trial first to determine whether it's right or wrong, but she didn't even get that right to bail, and that's why she went on the hunger strike.
Let's just talk a bit about the lèse majesté law, if we can, because you wanted this law to be amended in your campaign. That was one of the major planks of your campaign. Do you still maintain that position? Should this be amended?
It's still an issue on how to keep Thailand to remain as a constitutional monarchy. A part of the reform was a middle path between polarized opinions or feelings or the sentiment of where the role of the monarchy should be in the 21st century. And we as a lawmaker, we don't want to see polarizing opinions outside of the parliament.
Understand that,
we wanted to make sure that it's a common path.
But you required that, for that you would require an amendment. So do you still stand by that amendment? Do you want that amendment?
Yes, still in the boundary of what the Constitutional Court had decided. So
you won the election effectively last year. You won the most seats, yet you could not form the government, as a result of which one could not change the law as it stands now. So if someone like you, who had a popular mandate to make the amendment, could not make the amendment, how will this be amended?
I think the only way to do it is through the same thing, and also to explain to the resistance that we mean well for the monarchy. In a constitutional monarchy, we want the king to be above politics, and we don't want any other political opponents to use lèse majesté law to destroy political opponents and to push the youth away from the monarchy themselves. So it needs time, it needs domination of ideas, it needs explanation and things like that. Hopefully, that's what we do in the case against the Constitutional Court in the first week of June, which is 2 weeks away.
Speaking of the court system, I mean, you're talking about the lèse majesté laws and perhaps other laws being used to settle scores, potentially. That's what you were alluding to. What does that say about the justice system, the court system in Thailand? Is it independent? Is it reliable?
Well, there's certainly cases of judicial harassment to a few MPs here. In my case, I was unduly suspended for about 6 months during the Prime Minister's election in the Parliament. So speaking of the integrity of the system, we got 4.9 out of 10 from the index, and we're number 82 out of 140. So that kind of statistics would tell the audience something about the system in Thailand.
What would you tell the audience? What is your assessment of it? Is it independent? Is it reliable?
Somewhat independent, but then it depends on various cases that are sensitive to the public sentiment might not be as straightforward as it should be. We might have the structure, but the enforcement might be an issue.
In terms of enforcement, a case is certainly being enforced on you. You were talking about this case that is coming up for hearing again in June. Essentially, the case is that the Election Commission wants your party, the Move Forward Party, to be dissolved.
Yes.
And you to be potentially banned from politics for 10 years.
For a lifetime.
For a lifetime. How real is that possibility?
Given the historical record, this is going to be the 5th vicious cycle that it happens, in the past 20 years. So, the stats is against me, but I'm trying my best to fight tooth and nail and keeping the faith.
The previous iteration of the Move Forward Party, Future Forward, was already dissolved in 2020.
Yes.
Do you think the same could happen this time? Because there is a history of that. It happened with the Pheu Thai Party as well.
Still possible, but that's what we're trying to fight against, and we're trying to explain and argue our case that this should be the end of it, because it doesn't affect me personally or just my party, but Thailand, Thai democracy, the health of Thai democracy as a whole. We look up towards the German system when it comes to this in the way back, but it's not the same kind of enforcement when it comes to constitutional court over here in Germany and in Thailand in terms of where the court comes from and things like that.
I'd like to go back to what started all of this. Essentially, your campaign last year, your emphatic win that eventually happened, and the platform that you were standing on. You were talking about basically rewriting the rules of the game, in a sense, by sort of sorting out the establishment in terms of removing the military influence, talking about the influence of other interested parties, and also reform of the lèse, majesté laws. Going back to that time, do you think you overpromised something?
No, not at all. It was very simple
promises. But you didn't become Prime Minister.
That doesn't mean that I overpromised something.
But surely you misread the mood, right? I mean, if you are promising you're going to amend lèse, majesté and you're going to curb the influence of the military and other parties.
Okay, let's take
Did you really believe that this was going to happen?
Let's take a step back. So what I wanted to do is to reform Thailand while preserving the monarchy. That's in a sentence. We want to demilitarize, demonopolize, and decentralize Thailand.
But they didn't buy your argument. Surely you should have seen that coming, right?
Depends on who you ask. I mean, I got 14 million votes, so I guess...
But if you ask the establishment, they didn't see it that way.
Well, in election, establishment is equal to a regular Thais.
Right.
So we want to go through that in the same... We want to win the right way. Let's put it that way.
So you are convinced that you did not overpromise?
Not at all. It was not a radical promise. It was a very simple, democratic way of getting into power. But so I won, I formed a coalition, and I got blocked by the appointed senators. That's what happened.
I'll talk about the appointed senators in a bit, but just to go back to that election.
Sure.
You were in coalition with the Pheu Thai Party. The Pheu Thai Party came second after you, and eventually they formed the election, which is to say that they did not, in a sense, have the mandate of the people that you had. Does that make the current government, headed by Pheu Thai's Prime Minister Sreta, illegitimate?
I think there's a legitimacy crisis that when you perform, you underperform. There's expectation of a new government that comes in after a lost decade of the military junta to bring about change, to reform, to restructure, and none of that came up at the moment with the past 7 months now.
Was this election stolen from you?
As expected. It was part of the scenario analysis that, even if you win, or even if I won, it might not reflect into the governance because it's part of the constitution that was drafted 5 years ago. So I knew about this before going into the election, but I tried in every possible way, in every way that is ethical, to keep political integrity as much as possible. And I chose this path to become the opposition.
Okay, so now the same government is talking about referendums to change the constitution. Do you believe that the government is sincere when it says it wants to hold these referendums?
Still remains to be seen. I hope they're sincere because a lot of things that is going on in Thailand is a byproduct of that constitution. You have 2 referendums or 3 referendums, but the way you question the referendum, the devil's is in the detail. Direction-wise, looking all the way from Berlin, it might look like a right way to go, but it's actually the devil's in the detail, the kind of question you do, the timing, and the way you calculate the referendum, for example. So that remains to be seen.
All right.
As an opposition, we'll try to make sure that we keep them accountable to their promise.
Right. On the 22nd of May, if I'm not wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, will mark 10 years since a democratically elected government was overthrown by Prayut Chan-o-cha, who later became the Prime Minister of Thailand. How would you describe these past 10 years for Thailand in terms of democracy in the country? Has Thailand advanced when it comes to democracy? It's held a number of elections since then.
It's the last decade. Now a lot of pundits will call Thailand as competitive autocracy. It's like there's an establishment behind that allows elections once in a while. And even if the election result is not desirable, there are independent mechanisms, the tyranny of the minority of that 1% that can keep, the change from happening. The inertia, the resistance to change is always there in various ways. But they are much smarter now. I mean, back in the days, you probably see military coup to stop change. Right. You probably see warfare. You probably see violence on the street. Now you see judicial coup. Now you see lawfare. Now you see violence in the courtroom. So, it's about solidarity, support of Democrats all around Asia and the world to really fight against this competitive autocracy that is happening all around. Just
one final question for you, Mr. Limjaroenrat. You came this close to becoming Prime Minister. You literally are the man who would be Prime Minister, but are not, despite a thumping victory at the polls. Are you bitter about that?
I think my time will come. That's what I believe. Eventually, my time will come, and I can wait. It's political integrity that I had to hold. Otherwise, I can't sleep at night. So that's why I chose that part, and I never regretted it.
We'll leave it there for the moment. Pita Limjaroenrat, thanks so much for coming into our studio.
Thank you very much for having me.